Another strong element in the carry-on in the first week after the launch was a lot of argy-bargy about your account of Bob's having been very depressed in the second half of 1984.
Yes.
In the wake of Rosalind's difficulties, which you had to write about to make sense of all of that, and no doubt that aroused some sensitivities. Curious thing about this is it wasn't news, or it shouldn't have been.
It wasn't news at all. It was all on the public record.
Here's the most and possibly the only lyrical sentence in Bob's own memoirs, published in 1994, about the second half, about what overtook him with various things, including Rosalind's difficulties. For the first time in my life, I was caught adrift in a vast and lonely sea which threatened to engulf me. Now, in fact, he does go on and makes it even, you don't have to rely on lyrical sensibility to realise that he's talking about depression, but that sentence alone just tells it all.
Yes.
And that was published in 1994. I might be taking you back on around the circle on the media again, but it did surprise me that there was so much argy-bargy earlier this month about that.
I know, it's ridiculous. They all knew that. They were all aware of that. So it's what I was saying before. It's a combination of making mischief and the world having been invented last Thursday.
There was also some differences of opinion amongst the colleagues, of course, about how long it lasted.
Oh yes, that's right.
That helped to stir it along.
Yes.
I think Graham Richardson put it at a couple of years.
No, no, I don't think he put it that long. Keating put it at 4 years.
Keating reckoned it was all over by the middle of 1984.
Yes, and so for the whole, actually, so until the end of 1991, really, it was. Bob was in a state of terrible depression, but the consensus of those who worked in his office and were seeing him on a daily basis was that it lasted for about 6 months. Well, no, more accurately, for no more than 6 months. Very acute for 6 weeks. And of course, in that 6-week period, he'd also had the cricket ball breaking his glasses and glass going into his eye. So he's in a great deal of physical pain.
This was quite a serious injury because the glass penetrated his eye and as ultimately quite severely damaged the vision in that eye.
Yes, he has only 5% vision.
I've played it in a few Parliament and the Press cricket matches. If you're lucky, there are 3 or 4 cricketers amongst the 22. Bob was certainly one of them. Mm-hmm. It was the worst shot I've ever seen in any of those matches. Which I think he himself said. I think he said, he's told the story, he said it was a horrible shot. But it had quite a serious effect immediately because, as you're about to tell us, we had the difficulties with the family. Then that happened.
It happened the day he called the election.
The day after he'd called the 1984 election.
Yes.
So he campaigned depressed
and injured.
And injured.
Yes, yes.
But they got there. Before we leave the depression, and you were saying that the consensus was that he was out of it but within 6 months. I think that's his own account. I think in the memoirs he says he didn't feel fully himself again until the early part of 1985.
Really, yes, until that tax summit in 85. But it's funny, I guess I was the first person to use the D word. It wasn't, nobody said before it was depression. They said he felt depressed or was depressed. It was still very much, and for some people maybe still is, a taboo, which is unfortunate. And he certainly never had any treatment for depression. I specifically asked him, well, did you take antidepressants or have any medication? And he didn't. But
he did pull out of it unless you adopt the Keating version.
Yes, yes. Well, if you adopt that, he's probably still depressed.
I was asking you before what sort of a leader he was, and it is very hard to pin down. But you observed, and I think others have observed, that he was never a great parliamentarian. And it was partly because he had no patience for the frequent charades and conventions of Parliament. You went back and read the Hansards with the help of the office.
Yes.
Did you notice anything that led you to any conclusions about all of that and about his leadership?
Many conclusions, because the whole book focuses on the question of leadership. In the first book, or what was to be the first part of one huge book, one very big book, I looked at what sort of a man is he, because people kept on asking what he likes. So I thought, well, that's the question to answer. And in this, I wanted to answer the question, what sort of a leader was he? And if I may just briefly say a few things about leadership,
that's why we're here, to hear you say things about leadership.
Good. I was guided in my thinking a lot by three people, not all of whom agree on the issue, but the number one was Max Weber, the founder of sociology, Sir Isaiah Berlin, philosopher and also written a great deal about politics, and the man who's currently alive, Michael Ignatieff, who's written a lot about politics and actually a member of the Canadian Parliament now.
He's now the leader of the Liberals.
Yes, yes. So they're all people who've thought very deeply and whose ideas I found most interesting, particularly Weber. And so it was Weber who said the number one quality of the successful political leader is to fight. And certainly that's true when you think of it, because the leader must first fight for himself, second fight for his party, third fight for his government, and then fourth fight for his country against other countries. So Hawke has an enormous degree of fight in him. So does Keating, of course, so did Howard. And we're seeing about Julia. We will, in a way we don't know yet. But then another aspect of Hawke's leadership was that he was very much a consensus leader. So he listened to his what people had to say to him very much. That was the area in which Kevin Rudd unfortunately fell down completely. He really wouldn't listen to the advice that he was getting from the public service or other ministers. Hawke allowed a very free rein to the ministry. He was blessed with an extraordinarily talented ministry. It was just really rich in intellect and political savvy, and he let them have their head unless, in two circumstances, unless they got into trouble or were obviously getting into trouble and it was affecting the whole of government, or unless they came and asked him to help out. But I think his other very important quality, and that's something that Weber talks about, was that he developed the discipline of his emotions to what Weber called distancing himself from men and things, I think was how he put it.